Imagine this. You're walking onto a plane, ready to take your seat. You've had a long day, but you're just looking forward to some quiet time. As you approach your seat, you notice a woman sitting by the window. She looks at you, hesitates, and then suddenly asks if she can switch seats with someone else. Why? Because she doesn't want to sit next to you. It's a moment that's almost too hard to believe. You're not sure whether to be angry, hurt, or simply confused. You've never been judged like this, but now it's happening. What do you do in that moment? Do you stay silent, just let it slide and feel the sting of rejection? Or do you stand your ground, showing the world that no matter what people think, you're not defined by their prejudice? Meet Marcus. He's the kind of guy who walks into a room and commands attention, not because he's loud or boastful, but because there's a quiet strength about him. At 35, Marcus has lived a life that could have easily broken someone else, but not him. He's been tested again and again by the weight of the world's judgment. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were limited, Marcus learned early on that the color of his skin was often all people saw. School was no different. Teachers who assumed he was trouble before even hearing his name. Classmates who whispered behind his back, who made fun of his clothes, his hair, the way he spoke. But Marcus, he didn't let it get to him. He learned how to rise above it, how to ignore the hate and focus on his goals. He's not just any man. He's someone who's fought for every inch of respect he's earned. From graduating college with honors to building a successful career in a field dominated by people who don't look like him, Marcus has seen it all. The subtle racism, the microaggressions, the glances that say, "You don't belong here." But every single time, he stood his ground. His achievements weren't given to him. They were earned. And through it all, he's kept his dignity. Never letting anyone push him into a corner, never allowing their narrow views of him to shape how he saw himself. That's what makes Marcus different. He's been through the fire, but he hasn't let it burn him. He's been knocked down, but he always gets back up. He's learned that the only way to truly succeed in this world is to not let others define you, because they'll try. They'll try to tell you who you are, what you deserve, what you're capable of. But Marcus, he's learned not to listen. Now as he walks into the airport, his demeanor is calm, unbothered. It's not arrogance, it's confidence. He knows who he is, what he's worth, and nothing can shake that. But little does he know today, he's about to face a new kind of challenge. A challenge that tests not only his strength, but his ability to stay calm in the face of unexpected prejudice. Marcus steps onto the plane, his step steady and sure. He's been on countless flights before, each one a small, quiet escape from the hustle of his life. Today, however, something feels different. Maybe it's the weight of the upcoming business meeting, or just the usual nerves that accompany any big step. He pushes those thoughts aside, finding his seat in the middle of the plane, a spot by the window. He stows his bag, settles into the seat, and takes a deep breath. The engine hums in the background, and for a moment, it's just him. The calm before the storm of flight. His mind starts to drift, thinking of the things he'll do when he lands, the plans he's been working toward for months. But before he can lose himself in thought, a woman walks down the aisle. She's carrying a small bag, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She looks around, and then her eyes meet his. There's a brief moment of hesitation, like she wasn't expecting to see him there, sitting in the very seat assigned to her. It's hard to miss the way her body stiffens, the way her gaze shifts quickly to another seat further down the aisle. For a brief moment, she stands there, scanning the other passengers. Then, almost as if it's the most natural thing in the world, she leans over to the flight attendant and asks if she could swap seats. She doesn't say much more, but the tone of her voice, the way she avoids looking back at Marcus, is enough. It's clear. She doesn't want to sit next to him. Marcus watches it all unfold, but he doesn't say a word. His expression doesn't change. He's not surprised. Not anymore. But that feeling of being singled out, of being unwanted, stings. It's a familiar feeling, one he's felt all his life in all kinds of places. At school, at work, in stores. But it still hurts every time. The woman finally moves to another seat, the flight attendant obliging her request. Marcus sits back, but the discomfort lingers in the air, thick and palpable. He wonders if she's aware of how blatant her discomfort was, if she even understands the message she just sent. The rest of the passengers settle into their seats, oblivious to the tension that just occurred. For most of them, it's just another part of the journey. But for Marcus, this moment feels like a flashback to so many others in his life. The times when he was made to feel less than, when the world made it clear that his presence wasn't always welcome. He takes a deep breath, pushing it all aside. But deep down, the unfairness of it stings. He can't help but wonder how people like her are so quick to judge, to decide that someone isn't worth sharing space with. And he wonders, how does he respond to this? Does he let it slide like he's done in the past, or does he do something different this time? Marcus takes a deep breath, watching as the woman settles into her new seat. His mind is calm, but beneath that calm, there's a stir of emotions he's learned to control over the years. It's not anger, but something deeper, something that tells him it's time to do things his way. Instead of letting the moment consume him, instead of giving in to the temptation to lash out or let the unfairness break him down, he stands up. Slowly, deliberately, he gathers his belongings and walks down the aisle, his steps echoing in the quiet cabin. The flight attendant looks up as he approaches the counter. "Excuse me," Marcus says, his voice steady. "I'd like to change my seat." The flight attendant, unaware of the situation, nods and checks the seating chart. "Sure, let me see what we have." Marcus glances back towards the woman, still sitting in her new seat, her posture rigid and her face turned slightly away from him. It's a strange feeling watching someone who has made a decision based on something so trivial as skin color. But he doesn't dwell on it. Instead, his eyes lock onto the flight attendant as she offers him a new seat, one next to the woman. "This one's available," she says, handing him a new boarding pass. Without hesitation, Marcus accepts it. He doesn't flinch, doesn't pause for a second. It's as though he's already made his decision long before he stood up from his seat. As he walks back towards the woman, there's a certain stillness to him, a sense of quiet power. He doesn't need to explain himself. He doesn't need to raise his voice or demand respect. His actions are enough. When he reaches the row, the woman looks up, surprised to see him standing there, boarding pass in hand. For a brief second, there's confusion in her eyes. But then, as if it's the most natural thing in the world, Marcus takes the seat beside her. He doesn't say a word. The woman shifts uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting between Marcus and the aisle. She opens her mouth, about to speak, but then thinks better of it. There's an awkward silence that fills the space between them. But Marcus remains unfazed, as if this is nothing more than another day, another seat, another challenge to overcome. He leans back in his seat, adjusting his bag under the seat in front of him, and glances out the window. The engine hums, and the world outside seems so far away, so distant. For a moment, he's lost in the quiet of the plane, his mind at ease. He doesn't feel the need to confront the woman, to explain his actions, or to make her feel guilty. His presence is enough. The woman, now visibly uncomfortable, shifts in her seat again. She glances over at him, her expression tight. But there's something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, or maybe even realization. She's not sure what to do now, but Marcus doesn't look at her. He remains calm, composed, and in control of the situation. As the plane begins to taxi down the runway, the woman finally breaks the silence. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," she says, her voice small, almost apologetic. It's a half-hearted attempt, but it's something. Marcus turns his head slightly toward her, his eyes meeting hers. There's no anger in his gaze, just a quiet, steady strength. "It's okay," he replies, his tone even and calm. "It's not about being comfortable. It's about understanding that people aren't defined by what you see on the outside. The woman doesn't respond. Instead, she looks away, staring out the window. Marcus can see the wheels turning in her mind, the understanding slowly dawning on her. The air between them is still thick with discomfort, but now there's something else there, something that wasn't there before. Maybe it's regret, or maybe it's a simple recognition of how narrow her view of the world has been. Marcus doesn't need her apology. He doesn't need her approval. He knows who he is. He knows the kind of man he's always been, and he refuses to let anyone, especially a stranger on a plane, make him feel less than. This is his world, and he will not shrink away from it, not for anyone, not for her. As the plane ascends into the sky, Marcus settles deeper into his seat. He lets the hum of the engine drown out everything else. His actions have spoken louder than words ever could. The woman, for all her initial discomfort, is now left with a lesson, one she will carry with her long after the plane lands. And Marcus? He's just another man who's learned to rise above it all, quietly confident in the strength that comes from staying true to who he is, no matter what. The woman's eyes widen when she realizes that Marcus has taken the seat beside her. At first, there's a moment of disbelief. She blinks a few times, unsure if she's seeing things correctly. It's as if she's just realized the enormity of what she's done, the weight of her own actions coming crashing down. Her face flushes slightly, a deep crimson rising in her cheeks. It's not anger she feels, but a quiet shame. She glances down at her lap as if she's searching for something to distract her. But nothing changes the fact that Marcus is sitting right there, next to her. The man she'd tried to avoid, the one she'd quietly rejected without even realizing the full impact of her actions. For a brief second, she considers asking him to switch seats again, to apologize, to make the situation right. But she can't bring herself to do it. Something inside her stops her. Instead, she stares straight ahead, the tension between them palpable. Marcus, on the other hand, remains calm. He doesn't look at her. He doesn't give any sign that he even noticed the discomfort she's radiating. His demeanor is peaceful, collected. It's as if he's chosen to rise above it all, to focus on something greater than the petty conflict that she's inadvertently started. The flight progresses, and the first few minutes are filled with an uncomfortable silence. The woman shifts in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. She feels the weight of Marcus's presence beside her, and it's not the awkwardness she expected. It's more powerful somehow. His quiet confidence fills the space between them, and she finds herself drawn to him, not because of anything physical, but because of the strength he exudes. Every time she sneaks a glance at him, he's looking out the window, his expression unreadable. There's no sign of anger, no resentment, just calm. He's perfectly at ease in his own skin, something that makes her feel small in comparison. She wonders how someone could face such subtle rejection, such obvious prejudice, and remain unshaken. As the plane continues its journey, the woman begins to notice the little things, the way Marcus handles his phone with ease, the way he taps his foot to the rhythm of the plane's engine hum. He's unfazed by the discomfort that hangs in the air. In fact, he seems completely indifferent to it. There's no sign of bitterness, no trace of judgment. His presence beside her feels like an invitation to understand something deeper, something she hadn't considered before. Slowly, she starts to feel something stir inside her, a discomfort of her own, but it's not the same as before. It's guilt, a realization that she had been wrong. She tries to push the feeling away, but it won't go. How could she have acted like that? How could she have assumed so easily without considering the person behind the skin, the story behind the face? She shifts again, looking over at him, but this time she doesn't look away immediately. There's something different in her gaze now, an openness, a vulnerability. It's almost as if she's seeing him for the first time, not just as the person who was in the way of her comfort, but as someone who deserves the same respect she would expect from others. The silence between them is no longer uncomfortable. It's just silence. Peaceful. But beneath that quiet, there's a tension, an unspoken understanding growing between them. She's no longer focused on the fact that he's black or that she once rejected him based on that fact. She's focusing on the way he carries himself, the grace with which he handles everything that life throws his way. There's something almost noble about him, and it makes her realize just how deeply wrong she was. As the flight nears its end, she finds herself reflecting on her behavior. What would have happened if he hadn't bought the ticket next to her? Would she have remained oblivious to the impact of her actions? She can't say for sure. But she knows one thing. The man sitting next to her, calm and dignified, has taught her something far more important than any lesson she could have learned from avoiding him. She looks over at him again, this time with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. But he remains focused, lost in his own thoughts. She's not sure what to say, but she's certain of one thing. She's learned something about herself today, and she'll never forget it. The flight nears its final leg, and the cabin starts to fill with the hum of preparations for landing. As the plane begins its descent, the woman shifts uncomfortably in her seat once again. This time, there's something different in her movements, an urgency, as if she knows she has to say something. Taking a deep breath, she turns slightly toward Marcus. Her fingers clutch the armrest, and for the first time during the flight, she meets his gaze directly. It's not the uncomfortable glance she gave him earlier. This time, there's a softness to her expression, a sincerity. I owe you an apology, she says, her voice quiet but clear. I was wrong. I judged you before even knowing you, and I'm ashamed of that. Marcus doesn't say anything right away. He simply nods, acknowledging her words. There's no defensiveness in his posture, no sign that he's holding a grudge. He's not looking for an apology, not demanding an explanation. His calmness is almost disarming. I'm sorry for making you feel unwelcome, she continues, her voice faltering slightly. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I can see now how wrong I was. Marcus leans back in his seat, his hands resting in his lap. He turns slightly toward her, his gaze still steady, his expression calm and understanding. His voice is gentle, yet firm, as he responds. Prejudice doesn't define anyone, he says softly. It's easy to judge someone by what you see, by assumptions you make based on appearances. But in the end, it's our actions that matter. It's how we treat others, how we respond to situations, that shows who we really are. The woman listens carefully, the weight of his words sinking in. She's never heard someone speak with such quiet wisdom, especially after all she'd put him through. She feels a deep sense of gratitude for his grace, something she didn't expect but desperately needed. You don't have to apologize to me, Marcus continues. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. We all have our moments. What matters is that you understand now, and that's a start. She nods slowly, the truth of his words washing over her. She had expected him to be angry or confrontational, maybe even resentful. But instead he's shown her a quiet strength, one that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. His actions had already spoken louder than anything she could say. For the rest of the flight, the woman sits quietly beside him, the conversation flowing effortlessly now. They talk about small things, life, work, travel, simple topics that allow the space between them to shrink. But beneath it all, there's an unspoken bond, an understanding that wasn't there before. The judgment has been replaced with respect, the discomfort with a quiet sense of connection. As the plane touches down, she feels a change inside her, a shift in perspective that she knows will last long after she disembarks. She had started this flight with preconceived notions, with judgments that now seem so trivial. But now she sees Marcus not as a stranger or someone to avoid, but as a person just like her, someone with his own story, his own struggles, his own strength. When the plane comes to a stop and the seatbelt sign turns off, she turns to him one last time. Thank you, she says, her voice sincere. Thank you for showing me a better way. Marcus smiles, a simple, knowing smile that doesn't need any explanation. No, thanks needed, he replies. We're all just people. The rest is just noise. As she exits the plane, she walks away with a newfound understanding. The flight may have been short, but the lesson she's learned will stay with her forever. It's a lesson about judgment, about understanding, and about how small actions, like sitting next to someone, can make the biggest difference. And as Marcus walks out of the terminal, he carries with him the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that he, through his own grace and dignity, has made the world just a little bit better. In a world where we're often judged by things we can't control, like the color of our skin or where we come from, it's the way we carry ourselves, the way we treat others, that truly defines who we are. Every choice we make, every action we take, speaks louder than any prejudice we may face or any judgment we encounter. It's easy to fall into the trap of judging others based on appearances, to let fear or ignorance shape how we see the world. But as we've seen today, it's the simple acts of kindness, respect, and understanding that can break down walls and change lives. When we choose empathy over hate, when we choose to see the person rather than the stereotype, we become part of the solution. So, the next time you encounter someone different from you, take a moment to pause. Think before you act. Your response, your actions, can either reinforce division or create connection. You have the power to change the narrative, to rewrite the story of how we treat each other. The world can be a better place. It starts with us. It starts with you.